This is part 6 in my continuing series of painting at home while we're in the midst of this little bit of a pandemic. So, this one is a little presentation I lovingly refer to as Lies My Eyes Tell Me. And it's about visual oddities that we as artists run into. So, let's get going. First of all, art can create visual impossibilities. We know that. I mean, you look at that and it looks like something you couldn't possibly build or couldn't exist in reality. I love this one. When you look at this, how many feet does the elephant have? And as you go up and down and discover that it's got one too many, at no time does it ever look wrong as you're going up and down. So, what we have to do is ask ourselves one question. What is our job as representational artists? And oddly enough, the answer is to create believable lies. Now, Edgar Degas said in painting you must give the idea of the truth by means of the false. In my class, I have 3 major elements that I teach. Number 1 is use the grid to draw the image. Number 2, paint in everything before you try to make each element work. Number 3, use the big brush. Number 4, paint what you see, not what you think you see. And number 5 is the limited color palette. Now, I'm going to talk to you about each one of these individually so that you will understand what I mean. Let's start with use the grid to draw the image. Grids have been used forever by artists to get a better representation of reality. Here's an etching of an artist doing a drawing of a model. This post keeps his eye in one spot. He views the model through a wire grid and draws on a gridded piece of paper or parchment. In fact, on the left you can see an ancient drawing done using and has the grid over it so it can be transferred onto a wall. And then also there is the wire drawing grid in front of a still life with a gridded piece of paper. But in my class, what we do is we grid the photographs. And of course, we put a grid on the canvas. So when you grid the photograph, you're able to get it in exactly the right spot on the canvas, which is very important because everything in a painting is relative and is relative to everything else. So size is very important. There's a quote from an artist, an art instructor, I should say, that I really love. It goes, painting's easy. All you really have to do is put the right shape and the right color and the right tone in the right place. Intellectually, that makes a lot of sense. In this instance, this helps you get the right shape in the right place. But grids themselves can be a little tricky. Let me show you. Here's a grid. Here's perfectly parallel lines with black boxes stacked straight up on all of them, basically creating a grid. Now, if I were to move some of the boxes off to one side, all I'm moving is the boxes. I'm doing nothing else with the parallel lines. You suddenly can't see the lines as being straight anymore. It's a visual illusion. Some of them even look like they're converging. Let's put the boxes back. They all seem to straighten up. Nothing's changed except the boxes got moved. Let's look at another grid. Checkerboard is a perfect grid. But if I start to put black squares in the white and white squares in the black, it now doesn't look like it's a grid anymore. It looks like it wows in the middle. Even if I put a grid over it, it looks like it wows the grid. But in fact, nothing has changed. The grid is perfectly square. The checkerboard is perfectly square. It's a visual illusion. Your eyes can't see that it's square. All of this is about visual size. Visual size is what we use to create a 3-dimensional image on a flat 2-dimensional surface. So let me show you what I mean. We have been brought up to see things 3-dimensionally, so we make a lot of assumptions about size and location based on 3-dimensionality. So here is an image. It's on a flat surface, but it looks 3-dimensional. It looks like it goes back in space. So when we put a very large double-headed red arrow at the back and a little tiny double-headed red arrow over here on the right, that's what it looks like. But if I were to move the large arrow over, you can see it shrinking. You can almost sense it shrinking. Let's move the little one over toward it, and you can see it growing in length. But in reality, they're both exactly the same length. Now, the best example of this illusion is the tabletop illusion. Here we have a long, skinny table drawn three-dimensionally. That one looks like it could make it through the door fairly easily. On the other side, we have a little short, squat, square table that looks like it would have greater difficulty making it through the door. You put the two together. The one on the left looks like it can go through a door fairly easily, and the one on the right looks like it would get kind of jammed up, especially if you start to look at the surface, the actual tabletop. There's the tabletop, long and skinny. Over here, we have a great big square tabletop. But if you just look at the surface itself, the actual tabletop surface, what does a shape look like? That's what the shape of the top of the tabletop actually is on a flat surface. I'm going to move this over, and I want to show you how it seems to morph into a square squat shape. We're going to move it back onto the other one. In reality, they are both exactly the same shape and size. One represents long and skinny, one represents short and fat. So that's why we use the grid to draw the image. And it's really important to trust the grid so that when you have a sense that the eye is too small or the eye is too large and you're drawing using the grid, you have to really trust that the grid is telling you the correct information, because everything else will be drawn on to the canvas in relationship to that. So let's look at number 2. Paint in everything before you try to make each element work. What does this mean? There's a magnificent vision researcher named Bo Lotto. He has all sorts of wonderful videos on YouTube. You should check him out. He says all visual information is meaningless. It's what we do with that information that matters. And of course, I like to throw my oar in here too as well. And I say each element in the painting is relative, and it only works in context with the elements next to it. And I want to use an illustration that Bo Lotto did to show you that point. Here's an illustration that Bo Lotto did. It's masked over, but it's a kind of a gigantic Rubik's Cube type of element. And you can see that the kind of mustard-shaped chiclets are both exactly the same color. One is on the top of the cube and one is on the side of the cube, but they're exactly the same color when they're masked over. If we remove the mask, you now cannot actually see them as the same color. The one on the top looks brown, the one on the side looks yellow. Your brain will not allow you to actually see them as the same color. Partly put the mask back on and they start to move back toward the same color, but they are literally exactly the same color. So nothing is absolute. And this includes grayscale and color. And I'll show you what I mean by this. Here's grayscale. Let's talk about grayscale. In my painting with pencil drawing, I talked a bit about grayscale. In fact, some of these illustrations are in that. Grayscale is very important because it is, in fact, what every color is. Every color sits on a grayscale. So if we look at, there's a grayscale, black on the right, white on the left, and we'll run a grayscale across the middle. You see how it's lighter on the right-hand side and darker on the left-hand side. Now you notice I said that specifically lighter and darker, not whiter and blacker, because in fact the grayscale up the middle is exactly the same gray, left to right. It's in relationship to what's around it that's important. If we put the grayscale behind it again, you can see how the right-hand side lightens up, and it lightens up only because it's next to black. The left-hand side stays darker only because it's next to white. This is exactly the same with color. So let's look at the same illustration, only with red. You'll notice it looks lighter red on the right and darker red on the left. Still the same color. Blue, same thing, lighter blue on the right, darker blue on the left, but it's still a single color all the way across. So Grayscale is so important when you're doing a painting, and that's why you have to painting everything. You have to block in everything on the painting before you can do anything else to it, because the color you are trying to create will be created in comparison to the color next to it. Paint in everything before you try to make each element work. Let's look at number 3. Use the big brush. Now, Edgar Degas said a painting requires a little mystery, some vagueness, some fantasy. When you always make your meaning perfectly plain, you end up boring people. And as you know, I like to throw my oar in here too. Our job isn't to make a painting that looks exactly the same or better than the image we're painting. Our job is to make a painting that's interesting. So I want to give you an example of this. I want you to read each of these sentences, and it actually helps to read it out loud in my class, but you can, if you're all by yourself, you don't have to necessarily entertain the neighbors. So, go. If I show you a sentence with everything spelled out, it holds no experiential interest, just the meaning of the words. We get down to the period on this sentence, and with all the tricks coming up prior to this, you kind of wonder what the trick is. Now, there is no trick to this at the moment, because all the words, only way you can experience the sentence is by the meanings of the words. You have to know exactly what each word means to actually experience the sentence. It's not about the sentence itself. It's about the individual elements within it. So it's a little bit like this painting. This painting is a high realism painting of garlic. I can really appreciate it on 2 levels. 1, the skill it took to make it look like a photograph. And 2, if I were, in fact, madly in love with garlic. So let's continue on. Let me play another sentence, and this time I want you to, again, read this one out loud. But if I show you a sentence, then remove some letters. I let you read this one. I'll let you read this one. What you've now experienced is being part of the sentence. It's no longer about what the sentence means. It's about the experience of reading the sentence, of being a part of the whole concept of the sentence. It's a little bit like this. Can you read that? Some students get really focused on the specifics and are stuck with the idea of 1N73LL1G. Other students let it go, become part of it, and are able to read. Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, Stephen Hawking. So it's a little bit like this. Here's the photo reference I used to do a painting, and here's the painting I did. If you look really closely at the eye, you can see what I did paint, how I created it. If you look closely at the photograph of the eye, you can see all the ultra detail I could have put in it, including textures of the skin. But what I actually did was that. It gave the idea. It allows you to be part of the painting. You can still see it as paint, and yet you also see it as what it's trying to represent. So, let me let you continue reading these. I'm going to let you read these to yourself. I had a student once who thought that her job was to make the painting brighter, crisper, more perfect than the photograph. It's a bit like that. It's a bit like this painting. This is a wonderfully done, beautifully executed, high realism painting of a hero sandwich, essentially. And yet, as the more I look at it, the more I see the break in the bread at the top is looking a bit like coral. The mayonnaise dripping down is looking a bit like melted plastic. Some of the pieces of ham looking a bit like slabs of marble. He's trying to give us the sense of bread. And yet this artist gives us the same sense of bread, with far fewer brushstrokes, far less focus on absolutes. So that's why I want you to use the big brush, because the big brush is almost impossible to do high realism with. And you still have that sense of paint, and you allow the viewer to become part of the painting. Okay, let's look at number 4. Paint what you see, not what you think you see. What does this mean? This means left brain versus right brain. Now, I want to give you an example. I want to give you a sense of what left brain versus right brain really is. So, what I want you to do is I want you to tell me out loud the color of each of these words. I'm going to flash words up on the screen. Each word says something, yes, but each word is also in a colored text. I don't want you to tell me what the word says. I want you to tell me what color the text is. Okay, you ready? Let's go. How you doing? How's it going? I could flash those blocks of color all day long and you'd have no problem telling me red immediately. I could even do flash 2 letters and you'd have no problem telling me red immediately. The instant I flash this up, you immediately want to say blue because your left brain, which is the verbal side of your brain, is the more powerful one. It goes in and takes the information that it needs to give you the information it thinks you should have, goes into the right side of the brain, sucks up all the information it needs and sends it to you. But it definitely makes sure that it edits it for what it thinks you need. When you're doing a painting, often you can get stuck in what you think it should be instead of what it really is. So the actual trick is to shut off your left brain. Because what I want you to do is literally paint what you see, not what you think you see. It's really important to just observe. So let's look at number 5. Use the limited color palette. On this, I'm going to show you some examples here, which will also be in my color mixing presentation, which I'm still working on. I'm going to be expanding on it and helping the students who have asked me to do a color presentation piece, a color mixing presentation piece, because color mixing is a tricky business. And let me show you some of the sense of why it's so tricky. We're going to be using the limited color palette. Now, our sense of color is relative, and this is I want to thank Bolato yet again for this wonderful demonstration of how relative our color sense really is. If you look at those 2 photographs, they're exactly the same, just one's flipped. Now, what I want you to do for the next 40 seconds is stare at that white dot. Don't change your view to anything other than that white dot. As you're staring at that white dot for the next 40 seconds, I'll tell you what your visual cortex is doing. Your visual cortex is reprogramming itself to wholeheartedly believe that the left side of your vision is in a green light and the right side of your vision is in a red light. You're reprogramming how you see the world, or will see the world for the next few seconds, to believe that the left side of your vision is in a green light and the right side is in a red light. So in just a few seconds, we're going to go back to 2 identical photographs. And when you view those 2 identical photographs, they are going to be slightly different colors. Now, one of the things the Bolato says is sometimes this doesn't work for, 7% of men are red-green colorblind, so this doesn't work for them. But if you aren't red-green colorblind, this should actually show you how your sense of color in this world is very dependent on many things. So when I have a student say, how do I make flesh tone? My first question isn't about how do you make flesh tone, which is an idea. I don't want you to have the idea of flesh tone. I want you to have the observation. So my question is, which flesh tone? Now, we're using golden colors, and of the 89 colors from golden, not one of them is called flesh tone. But these are the only colors you get to use in my class. 4 colors plus white. Now let's look at a photo reference that I'm going to do a painting of. There's the photo reference. And if you look really closely at it, those 5 arrows are pointing to flesh tones. And let's look at what those colors really are. Those are all flesh tones. I have a fascinating observation that often I have students who just don't want to use white as a flesh tone. I had one student say to me that that means they're dead if they have white. If it looks white, it's white. And of course, that's white with a little bit of yellow in the corner. The red in the middle is, in fact, cadmium red dark on the right, cadmium red light on the left. And then this is a slight variation of cadmium red light on the left with cadmium red light on the or dark on the right, and then white to modify the left-hand side. When you're talking about green, you're talking about yellow and blue, but yellow and blue will give you a very bright green, so you have to dull it down with the cadmium red dark. And in my class, you don't get to use a black out of the tube. You have to make the blacks out of the blue and the dark red. So when you actually mix and see the colors you're trying to create, then you can create the painting. And there's the painting I did from it. So those are the 5 elements that I run in my class, and hopefully they're there to help you deal with the lies your eyes tell you. I have one more funky little thing. I want to throw this one at you. Again, talking about grayscale, and I'm talking about how your eyes see color, even in grayscale. So let's do this one. I want you to stare at this image for 20 seconds. First of all, notice that it's black and white while you stare at it for the first 5 seconds. Then I'm going to let it count itself down. Now, it's going to count itself down in rather garish colors. So here we go. It's going to count itself down. When it comes back, it's going to come back to the black and white image. And it's going to give you little color hits. Just look for it. Look for green grass and blue sky on a black and white image. Here we go. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope we can get together again for some classes once all this pandemic is over. Thank you for watching. I'm going to post some more videos soon, including my color mixing video. And let me know what you think. Send me an email at nicholas@piercepaintings.com.